Very good. Okay, let me find where
Where is it?
schema is. 1 second.
Here, Seema.
Huh? Not Seema, man. Schema.
Okay, same. थोड़ा इधर उधर चलता है.
Okay. So, what is schema? Schema is everything that you know. All the information that you have is schema. So, imagine all the information you have in files and you put it in your brain. So, every file, every page, every word is a schema. Okay. It is a cognitive framework that helps you understand and develop information. Okay, it will help you receive new information and develop further on it. Schema again is a cognitive framework or a concept that helps you organize and interpret information. Schema can be useful because they allow for us to take shortcuts in interpreting vast amount of information that is available in our environment. So when we're talking about schema, it is almost like that processor in your head that lets you take in new information, immediately it sorts it out, immediately it'll help you perceive it, understand it, comprehend it, and then it'll let you do the work again. Okay, so all your work is done there. And it is a mental framework that also causes us to exclude pertinent information to focus instead only on the things that confirm our pre-existing beliefs and ideas. So what a schema, a negative side to schema is that whatever information we have, it blocks us from allowing new information that changes what we already know. Suppose say I believe that let me take an example. uh, Mangoes. I suppose say I only eaten banginpalli all my life. That's a particular type of a mango. And someone says, no, 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 there are so many other types of mangoes. Banginpalli is not the only one. My schema of mangoes stops me from learning about the other mangoes. It won't let me change my pre-existing belief or idea that there's only one type of mango into thinking that there are different types of mangoes. Schema can contribute to stereotypes and make it difficult to retain any new information that does not conform to our established ideas about the world. So, again, it's the same thing. If I have a certain information or a stereotype, say, suppose it is only example, I have no stereotyping against anyone. I do not believe in stereotypes. Say that Tamilians love sambar. This is what I've heard. I've seen people who do not also. I do not know if it's true. I do not want to offend anyone. Again, suppose say for example, we take Tamilians who love sambar. Anything against that will not be accepted by our brain. That forms stereotyping. That means if I see a Tamilian walk to me, towards me, I'll be like, oh, this guy likes sambar, probably, and all that. So, no, it won't let us change our mind. If we go, if Indians go out of India to places like US and all that, they stereotype us to thinking we are brilliant IT people. But Indians basically almost rule almost all types of genres, all types of jobs in the world. Biggest company biggest industry sorry biggest companies have CEOs who are Indians, right? So all these stereotypes are not correct about us, but still the schema of these people apart from our country or towards our country and country people makes them block out new information that they're receiving about us. Now, historical background, the point about schema or the basic concept about of schema was given to us by this British psychologist by the name Frederick Bartlett. Okay, he used it as a learning theory. It was a part of his learning theory. And Bartlett suggested that our understanding of the world was through networks of abstract mental structures. Okay, and apparently, theorist Jean Piaget was the one who termed the word schema or coined the word schema. So I think that is where Seema's name came from, because it is her grandfather who named schema. And it was popularized through whatever work he was doing. According to his theory, according to his theory of cognitive development, children go through a series of stages of intellectual growth. And in the Piaget's theory, the schema is both a category of knowledge as well as a process of acquiring that knowledge. Okay. He believed that people are constantly adapting to the environment around them, and they take in new information and learn new things. For example, a young child would first see a four-legged animal. Okay, suppose they see a dog, and they'll be like, "What is this?" So the information given to them by their parents is that this particular animal is a dog. All these children see at that point of time is that it is a furry animal that has four legs, a tail, and a mouth. Okay, so next when they go see a horse or a miniature horse for the sake of debate, they go see a miniature horse, they'll be like, "Oh, that's a dog." Or they see a cat and be like, "No, that's a dog." And then the father or the mother will be like, "No, beta, this is not a dog. This is not a cat. This is a miniature horse. It is a smaller version of a bigger horse." What is a horse? A horse is something that trots around the place, gallops around the place, and they'll give them more information. So each and every information is a schema. Now there are different types of schema. While Piaget focused on childhood development, schemas are something that all people possess and continue to form and change throughout their lives. Object schema are just one type of schema that are focused on what an inanimate object is or how it works. For example, what is a car? Knowledge about a car is object schema. Okay, knowledge about a pen is an object schema. Knowledge about a phone is object schema. There are other types of schema as well. The other types include a person schema. This focuses on what a specific individual is about. For example, how they appear or how they behave, what their personality is, what their liking, disliking is. These are all person schema. It was knowledge about another person. Now, social schema is your etiquettes when it comes to your social gatherings. Suppose you go to a social gathering, you're sitting at a buffet, you're sitting at a table and they're offering you meals. The way you eat is social schema. The way you pick up the fork is a social schema. So when I was doing bachelor's in hotel management, we had this entire chapter or practical on how to place a dining table setup. Okay, and from where do we pick up our spoons and forks. So we had an extensive thing, and we had classes on how to eat in front of a distinguished person or a very high level person. You cannot put your elbows on a table. That is etiquette. That is social schema. Okay, self schema is knowledge about yourself. This can be this can include both what you know about your current self as well as ideas about yourself. Okay, you can it can be about how you think of yourself in the future. What do you see yourself as in the future is also part of your self schema. Event schema, this is focused on patterns of behavior that should be followed for certain events. Suppose you're at a wedding, you can't go in jeans and t-shirt and say, "Oh no, this is the way I'm going to be." You're at an event, you're at a function, you're at a festivity, so you'll have to dress accordingly. That is probably event and social schema mixed. Okay, so at event schemas, this this acts much like a script informing you what you should do, how you should do it, and what you should say at particular situations. So at suppose say an interview, you can't go and say, "Oh, I'm going to talk about my dogs, I'm going to talk about my friends." No, you have to talk about your technical stuff in an interview. So that again is your event schema, telling you what, where, when, why, and how. Okay. Next, we move on to Piaget's theory. Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development. Sorry about that. Now, as we all know, Jean Piaget had developed a stage theory, developmental cognitive development theory. Yeah,
Anyone?
Prahash, you had something?
Any questions on schema from
Oh
anyone?
yeah,
Or
please. I'm so sorry. Yeah, any questions on schema for everyone?
it was clean to me. It was very clear to me. If nobody has any,
It's good. Vasudha,
Thank you.
it's good. We can move
Thank you
on.
so much. Okay. So Jean Piaget had come up with this cognitive development theory or theory of cognitive development, which suggested that kids would move through 4 different stages of mental development. His theory focused not only on understanding how children acquire their knowledge, but also on understanding natural intelligences. It had four stages, as we previously mentioned. By now, most of you actually know what these stages are. Sensory motor stage, that is from birth to 2 years old. Pre-operational stage, that is from 2 years to 7 years old. Concrete operational stage from 7 years to 11 years old, and formal operation stage from 12 and above. That is all your adolescence, that is early adolescence to late adulthood. All of it is under formal operational stage. Now we'll go through each of these stages, okay? Uh, the sensory motor stage, again from birth to 2 years old. Major characteristics of development and developmental changes are: the infant knows the world through their movements and sensation. The child learns about the world through basic actions like sucking, gasping, looking, grasping, looking, and listening. Infants learn that things continue to exist even though they cannot be seen. Okay, that is object permanence. Suppose, say, you take a child and you put in front of them a chocolate. They're looking at it, and the minute you cover it, it disappears. Apparently for them it is like as though it doesn't exist anymore. Now when we play peekaboo with a child, when you close your face with your hands, you know you're there, but for the child you have disappeared. That is what object permanence is. They learn that things exist even though it is not being seen. Okay, they are separate beings from the people and objects around them. I don't understand what that means. Okay, they realize that their actions can cause things to happen in the world around them. That means if they cry, they get milk. If they cry, their diapers are changed, their poop is clean. All this is a part of what they do, what they learn. That if they do something, something else happens in the world. During this early stage of cognitive development, infants and toddlers acquire knowledge through sensory experiences and manipulating objects. A child's entire experience at their earliest period of this stage occurs through basic reflexes, senses, and motor responses. That means when they're sitting at a particular play area, if the dog moves around, they're getting information that says that the dog is soft by touching the dog. Okay, otherwise if the dog if there's a very cold item around there, if there are binkies right there and it's very cold because their mother put frozen banana or a banana which is very cold in it, when they touch it, they're like, oh, this is cold. They're receiving sensory information that they're learning about at that particular time. They're learning things from their environment and they see everything happen, and that is why sensory motor, right? You're receiving information from your sensory receptors. It is during the sensory motor stage that the child goes through a period of dramatic growth and learning. As kids interact with their environment, they are continually making new discoveries about how the world works. So if they remember when you're playing with a child, no, you go to a switch and you'll be like on and off. So you look at the fan and you'll say on, they'll push the button and they'll see the fan turn on. They realize that this is how it works. That means if you turn on the switch, the fan will start working. Things like that are still they're learning about it. These are discoveries. Okay, when you say when a child wants to touch something hot, you'll be like, no, it is hot, you'll burn your hand. They'll be like adamant as to, no, I want to touch it, I want to touch it, I want to touch it. If you let them touch it, they'll be like, oh, my hand burns if I touch something hot. When what hot means is burning, right? So they won't touch it again. This is all new discoveries that they're making. And if they again if someone, if they're crying, they realize that mother is going to come and pick them up. These are all discoveries that they make. The cognitive development that occurs during this period takes place over a relatively short period of time and involves a great deal of growth. So what it means is, during these 2 years, these children grow to a large extent. These infants are growing through a large extent. There is so much information that they're receiving and they're understanding. Children not only learn how to perform physical actions such as crawling and walking, they also learn a great deal about language from people with whom they interact. So when they're talking to their parents, they're learning about language. When they start saying mama, papa, water, doggy, and stuff like that, it means they're learning the language that they're interacting with, right? People around them, whatever language they're interacting with, they're learning that. Piaget also broke this stage down into a number of different substages. It is during the final part of the sensory motor stage that early representational thought emerges. Piaget believed that developing object permanence or object consistency, the understanding of the object continues to exist even when they cannot be seen, was an important element at this point of development. By learning that objects are separate and distinct entities and that they have an existence of their own outside the individual perception, the children are then able to begin to attach names and words to objects. That means at this particular stage, they know that a ball is something that they're playing with. It is round in shape. Okay, so they attach the word ball to it. When they're talking about binky, a binky is that sucking thing that they use to keep what we call pacifier, right? Sorry, I couldn't get the word. Pacifier is the word that is used to that object that they keep sucking on. These are all the words that they're associating with the objects that are around them. We move on to the second stage, that is pre-operational stage. This is from 2 years of their life to 7 years of their life. The major characteristics and developmental changes that take place are that the child begins to think symbolically and learn to use words and picture to represent the object. Children at this stage tend to be egocentric and struggle to see things from another perspective of from the perspective of others. While they are getting better with language and thinking, they still tend to think about things in a concrete terms. This means that these children are now thinking in a way that whatever I think is the way everybody thinks. They don't have another format of thinking. Whatever I think is the way everybody else thinks. And when they're getting better with languages, they also get better with concrete terms. That means whatever is real in front of them is what they understand. They do not understand anything abstract at this point. Everything has to be concrete. That means they're understanding things like what is water, what is a glass, what is a pen, what is a book, what is a pencil. This is the time when they start learning about all these things. The foundation of the foundation of language development may have been laid during their previous stage, that is during the sensory motor stage, but its emergence of language, that is one of the major hallmarks of the pre-operational stage. I'm really doubting the language here. Okay. So at whatever it is, when a child is about 2 years old, before 2 years old, they know, they're able to understand the words that we speak. They're able to respond to the words that we speak. Suppose when you take a game to these children and you're like, put the square in the place where the square is. Or when you ask them what is green color, they understand what you're talking about, but they cannot speak it at that point of time. But in the pre-operational stage, this is where they're able to talk about what they are looking at. When you say green, If there's a green square there, they'll pick up the green square. Okay. Children become much more skilled at pretend play during this stage of development, and yet continue to think very concretely about the world around them. What they mean here is pretend play is this imaginary friend that they have around them. Okay. These imaginary friends are the friends that they can see apparently, but we can't. Okay. But whatever they're playing with is about concrete stuff. When you're talking about puzzles, they're looking through puzzle pieces and trying to put them together. That is what they understand. At this stage, everything is magical to them, yet very logical to them. Both, seriously. Okay, at this stage, kids learn through pretend play, but still struggle with logic and take the point of view of others. Sorry, and taking the point of view of others. That means they're like, okay, this is my way. The ball is mine means the ball is mine. They don't share or something. Things like that happen. If they fall, they're like, no, this is because of that person. I did not fall on my own. They want everybody else to believe that that is true, even though they did not fall on their they fell on their own and it's not the other person. They also struggle with understanding the idea of constancy, sorry, not consistency, constancy. For example, a researcher might take a lump of clay and divide it into two equal pieces, then given to a child the choice between the two pieces to play with. One piece of clay is rolled into a compact ball and the other is smashed and flat into a pancake shape. Since the shape of the flattened shape looks larger, the pre-operational child is likely to choose a piece of clay that is flat because it is more, right? So they think they can play with more amount of clay. Here, your logic comes in, right? There's this test that Jean Piaget had come up with, which talks about volume, mass, and everything, where a glass is taken and two glasses are taken, they're of equal volumes. But the amount of water put in them is also equal. But once the shape of the glass changes, the child will think that the glass look, which assumes to be having larger amount of water, has more amount of water than the glass which is okay. I don't think I've come up with this. There are two glasses. The two glasses are of equal shape, equal size, and everything. Okay. And they take one glass and pour it into another taller glass, right? And this taller and thinner glass will actually look like as if there's more volume of water. And when it is shown to these pre-operational children, at the end of the pre-operational stage especially, they think that the water glass, which is taller and longer, has more water than the one in the shorter glass that they've previously taken the water from. Now, all this is explained in that particular age. Next, we move on to the concrete operational stage, that is 7 to 11 years. Before I go ahead with the next two stages, is there any doubt?
Nah, all good.
No. Thank you. Okay, ages 7 to 11 is your concrete operational stage. The major characteristics that are happening here is during this stage, the child begins to think logically about concrete events. They begin to understand the concept of conversation, and the amount of liquid in the short wide cup is equal to that of the tall cup or the skinny cup, for example, whatever we were talking before. Their thinking becomes more logical and organized, but is still very concrete. That means whatever they see is what they understand. Any abstract information is not understood. The child begins to use inductive logic and reasoning from specific informations to general principles. While children are still very concrete and literal in their thinking at this point of development, they become much more adept to using logic. The egocentrism of the previous stage begins to disappear as the kid becomes better at thinking about how others might view a situation. Suppose, say, this child is running around and he breaks a vase. at this stage, that is the concrete operational stage, he realizes that breaking that was a mistake. Okay, because that is what his mother is going to say. That means he's able to understand from his mother's point of view. And there's an other example where there are three dolls or three mountains that are put up on a small table. The child is sitting at one end of the table, and another person is sitting. The person conducting the exam is sitting at the other end of the table. When the child is asked to choose from pictures that are from the examiner's point of view, the child at this stage is able to point out the correct picture. That means he's able to take the point of view from other people as well. This particular example might be literal, but you get it. Okay. While thinking becomes much more logical during the concrete operational stage, it can also be very rigid. At this point, the child tends to develop or tends to struggle with abstract and hypothetical concepts. That means if you're talking to a child at this stage and say hypothetically someone fell down and broke their leg, they'll be like, oh, did somebody actually break their leg? They don't understand the concept of imagining or trying to think about things that are not really in front of them. During the stage, children also become less egocentric and begin to think about how other people might think and feel. Kids in this concrete operational stage also begin to understand that their thoughts are unique to them, and not everybody else necessarily shares their thoughts, feelings, and opinions. Is this clear? Can we move on to the last stage?
Yes.
Okay. And the last stage is formal operational stage, which is from the age 12 and up. That is till the end of time. It is also said that the people do not move on to formal operational stage. Sorry, not everybody moves on to the formal operational stage. Only 30% of people mostly move on to the stage. At this stage, the adolescents or young adults begin to think abstractly and reason about hypothetical problems. Abstract thoughts emerge. That means they start thinking about what is not really in front of them. They start thinking about bigger pictures. This is where their mental ability of thinking about the abstract things comes in. Teens begin to think more moral, philosophical, ethical, social, political issues that require theoretical and abstract reasoning. Okay, I think I lost my page. Just a second. Yeah. They begin to use deductive logic and reasoning from a general principle to specific information. At the final stage of Piaget's theory involves an increase in logic, the ability to use deductive reasoning, and understanding of abstract ideas. Again, abstract is not what is really in front of them. They have to imagine this. Imagining, it is not only imagining, it is about thinking about these objects that are not really in front of them. At this point, people become capable of seeing multiple potential solutions to a problem and think more scientifically about the world around them. The ability to think about abstract ideas and situations is the key hallmark of the formal operational stage of cognitive development. The ability to systematically plan for the future and reason about hypothetical situations are crucial abilities that emerge during this stage. It is important to note that Piaget did not view children's intellectual development as a quantitative process. That is, kids do not just add more information and knowledge to their existing knowledge as they get older. But instead of all this, Piaget suggested that there is a qualitative change in how children think as they gradually process through these four stages. progress through these 4 stages. A child at 7 does not just have more information about the world than he did at 2 years old. There is a fundamental change about how he thinks that the world has changed around him, or how he thinks the world is around him. This is Piaget's theory. Now we'll move on to the last bit of this, where of my part of the class, that is from where, or where is memory stored. Just a minute. Guys, do you have any doubts so far?
No. Thank you.
Okay. Apparently, I haven't confused anyone. Good for me. Okay. So when okay, since we've already gone through this Atkinson stage model theory and Wog and Norman's theory, most of us already know where our memory is stored. Okay, we know it is stored somewhere in the brain. Our brains take this encoded information and puts it in storage. The storage is a creation of permanent records of information in order for the memory to go into storage. Okay, that is, when they're talking about storage, it is always your long-term memory. It has to pass through 3 different stages or distinct stages, which are your sensory memory, your short-term memory, and then long-term memory. Now, again, when I'm talking about Atkinson's stage model theory, or your Wog and Norman's primary and secondary memory theory, these are all talking about how you process this information that comes in from your sensory memory through your short-term memory and into your long-term memory. They talk about how you transfer all this memory into your all this information into your long-term memory. It has to pass through three distinct stages. Okay, the 3 main forms of memory are sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. Long-term memory can hold an indefinitely large amount of information and can last for a very long time. Implicit and explicit memories are 2 different types of memories. All this information, no matter how many memories you talk about, or where this memory is, or where your information is stored, no matter how much you talk about this, hippocampus is where all this is taken. That means if you're drawing a path through your brain to find out where your long-term memory is, you'll end up at the hippocampus. The hippocampus is located in the brain's temporal lobe, and it is where episodic memories are formed and indexed for later access. This is the end of my session. Any doubts?
Thank you, Vasudha.
Thank you.
No doubts. It was very clear. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, let's move on to what next? Who else have anything to do today? Nothing? All done?
I think there's one more topic left out. That's where do emotions come from?
That is Srivali's topic, no?
Right, where Srivali?
Here I am.
Okay.
We finished variables and their types.
Yeah.
Yes, in your absence. We waited for you to disappear.
Thank you. So we are at the end, is it?
Yes, the most interesting topic.
So we want to discuss where do emotions come from.
Where?
So,
Where?
Where? Indian system says that there are 9 different types of emotions. But one guy, Paul Ekman, proposed that humans experienced 6 basic emotions: anger, fear, surprise, disgust, joy, and sadness. And after that, there were so many researchers doing so much research on the exact number of human emotions. Some said only 4, and some said more than 4, some said more than 6, and some even said as many as 27. So whatever it is the number, one is clear that emotions rise from the activity in the brain. So emotions come from brain. So there are three brain structures which are closely linked with emotions and the um, creation, I should say, where emotions are really arise from these three parts. What are they? The amygdala, insula, and some structure in the midbrain called periaqueductal gray. Okay, so all these three once in a while, I mean, combined together, they closely link with, they are linked with emotions. Okay, so first thing, amygdala, that is an it's a small almond shaped part of the brain which works with your hippocampus to create long term memories. And then often specifically they are like emotional events such as and it is known for linking fear, aggression, anxiety to knowledge of people or places. Okay, so any damage to amygdala reduces aggression, but it also makes difficult to people avoid painful or threatening situations. They can't take that equally as they are painful. Okay, so this amygdala integrates emotions, emotional behavior, and motivation. It interprets fear, helps distinguish between friends and enemies. And because the moment you distinguish between people, you will be afraid with strangers, and that will be helpful for you to maintain your safety, and identify social rewards and how to attain them. So coming to social rewards and how to attain them, these are the things that how that amygdala performs those emotional behavior. And it is also important for a type of learning called classical conditioning. What is classical conditioning? Ivan Pavlov's dog and what bell. Okay, so why? Because the amygdala makes that classical conditioning with relationships between events and the stimuli. So there was an event of a bell ringing, and it has a stimuli of salivating in the dog. So in order to remember this, amygdala will have the effect. I mean, it has the job of it. Okay, so that is with classical conditioning. And the second part is the insula or the insular cortex. That is a source of disgust, wherein you get a strong negative reaction to an unpleasant odor or unpleasant sight, because you will look at it, you have that aversion. And the periaqueductal gray located in the brainstem, that is also for pain perception. So we are done with what are the brain structures involving with emotional integrity, the emotional behavior and motivation. So this is done with the biological part. So whatever is the emotion and the, I mean, coming to emotions and memory consolidation, since we have amygdala here, wanted to put a small thing here, saying amygdala, we know that it plays a role in memory consolidation. So for anything to learn and to go into the long-term memory, it takes time. So they did a research on this memory consolidation over the time. The event that occurs, I mean, the learning event that occurs is slowly put into the long-term storage over time, based on rehearsal or any other form of repeated information processing of the same learning. So I repeat rehearsal again and again, it is put into the long term storage over time. So this process is called memory consolidation, and until it reaches the permanent stage, amygdala plays a major role. So during this consolidation period, the memory can be modulated. Saying they did an experiment, they gave some stress hormones. They did an emotional arousal in the subject, and then that influenced the strength of the memory of that event. Whatever they have learned, if they are in emotional arousal, that had influence on the storage of information in the long term memory. So they have come to a conclusion saying greater emotional arousal following a learning event enhances a person's retention of that event. So for this, I chose Vasudha's example the other day. She said, I want to explain about Ivan Pavlov's classic conditioning because it is close to my heart. What I drawn the conclusion from her statement saying that because it has an emotional bonding with respect to with the being with her dog or dogs, so that made her get attached to Ivan Pavlov's classic conditioning and remember and learn and project the same way with the details. That's the effect of emotion on learning. So that is done. We know how different parts of brain are included in the emotional arousal, and we saw what is amygdala's part or emotional arousal's part in learning an event and storing it. Now there are some theories where James Lang theory says that emotions arise from physiological arousal. That means I see a scary movie, again bhoot story. Okay. So I see a scary movie, and then until unless my body physiologically reacts that, we can't interpret as fear. That's what this theory says. And then we here they gave an example saying if you encounter a threat in your environment like a snake or a simple cockroach, it would make your heart race, increase your respiration rate, you're afraid, you sweat. And the moment, or it can be anything like a little stage fear as well. You go onto a stage in front of 100 people, you get stage fear, you tremble, and then you have a little sweat, and then only then you will assume that you will interpret, the body interprets that you are afraid. That is what your stage fear is. So, and it also says that different arousal patterns would be associated with different feelings. Like not everybody will be sweating when there is a stage fear. They might stammer. They might have a sweaty palms, like that. So, and also it is doubted that not every times the physiological arousal that occurs is distinct enough to say what kind of emotions that we experience. So it could be they both are independent, or they could be separate. This emotional reaction what we are going through, fight or flight situation, would be separate and independent of the physiological arousal, even though they co-occur. This is what James Lang theory of emotion. This is very old and first of its kind in the emotional theories. That's all.
Can we stop recording?
Yeah.